What's up, Bucs fans? Back at it again with another episode of Pirate Parlay presented to you by the Sick Podcast Network. We've got a great show for you today. I want to thank everyone for tuning into my inaugural episode. We've got a special guest in the house today, going to break down behind enemy lines, a little about the Saints, and we'll also break down some of the top stories around the news, including who might not be able to play on Sunday's game against the Saints. Stay tuned. We'll be right back, breaking everything down here on Pirate Parlay.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. Pirate Parlay.
Battle intercepted, picked off in the end zone. Bucs are going to beat the Chiefs. We're the champions of the world.
The sickest Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. It's going to be sick.
So coming off a short week, welcome back here to the Pirate Parlay podcast, presented by the Sick Podcast Network. Coming off a short week and a disappointing loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, the Bucs started their week with a breezy walkthrough on Wednesday before kind of ramping it up a little bit today. And injury report came out, and things are not looking great in the Bucs' favor. They did have one positive note. Carlton Davis is back participating as a full participant with that turf toe injury. I still think it's going to be a game time decision for him, but the fact that he's trending in a full participation from a limited is definitely a step in the right direction. Devin White also bumped up with a limited participation. Last week, it was a groin injury. He's notated as a foot injury this week. So that's something to bear monitor too as well. Going back to his stomping grounds in New Orleans, played at LSU, you know he's going to get hyped for that game. So hopefully he can be close to 100%. Had the interception, probably could have been a pick six in that Eagles game, but clearly hampered by that injury, ran out of bounds. So the rest of the injury report, not so hot for the Bucs. Jamel Dean, who left the game against the Eagles, came back in with a shoulder injury, did not participate for the second day in a row. Servasia Dennis and Kalijah Cansey, who have missed the last two games, also not participating. Those guys look like they're probably out again. Maybe try to bring them back after the bye week. That cornerback room just continues to take hits with Derek Pitts, dealing with a hamstring injury, who did not participate for the second day in a row. And perhaps one of the biggest names on there is Vita Vea, not participating again for the second day in a row with a pectoral injury. Guys, if Vita Vea can't go, it's going to create a whole bunch of problems for the Saints matchup with the Bucs when they take them on in Week 4 on Sunday. He's obviously the guy that takes all those double teams and anchors the middle of the run defense. And you could just tell, even though going up against a really good offensive line and center and Jason Kelce, he was not at 100%. If they don't have him, if they don't have Kelce, it's going to be asking a lot of their backup defensive tackles to kind of hold in the middle and really solidify against the run game that can get after you in multiple ways. I said earlier in this week on my Twitter, I don't expect Jamel Dean to be active for this game. I'll be surprised if Carlton Davis is too, especially with a turf toe injury. You kind of want to let that rest on its own. It takes a little while, but if he can go, he's going to go. Remember, Michael Thomas has been out for the last almost 2 years. He played last year, but in week 2, but wasn't the same Michael Thomas, clearly banged up and not 100%, went on IR and missed the rest of the season. And, he gets up for that matchup, his slant boy, as he calls him. So, it's going to be something to monitor throughout the week on this injury front with the Buccaneers. And we'll get into the Saints because they're dealing with a slew of injuries as well, including their starting quarterback. We'll get into that as well. And because the Buccaneers are dealing with injuries at cornerback, they brought a couple guys in. William Jackson III, former first-round pick from the Cincinnati Bengals, came in for a workout this week. He signed last season with the Washington Commanders on a 3-year, $40 million deal, but dealt with a bulging disc in his back. And really, after the first few games, he was kind of sent down to bench to deal with that while they found a replacement for him. Ended up getting traded mid-season to the Steelers, but never played it down for them. He's now healthy, and he was in for a workout, as well as another cornerback that they brought in Tay, I believe his name is. I'll get it for you guys now. But opposite end of the spectrum, not a guy who was a first-round pick, a guy who was an undrafted, bounced around a little bit here and there. Tay Hayes, not Days, my apologies. Bounced around here and there. He's got 13 games of experience, a couple starts under his belt, but that's more of the back of the roster guy. If they think Jamel could be out a long-term situation or longer than expected, they can make a move on William Jackson. They are extremely shallow at this position. We'll know more. Bols has been able to get guys in on a Friday and get them ready to play on a Sunday. Remember Pierre Desir and even Richard Sherman a few years ago as well. So if they have not seen enough progression from Jamel Dean, there could be someone that they sign and bring in tomorrow, as soon as tomorrow, to kind of get ready to play, even in a limited role on Sunday. So something to watch. We spoke with Dave Canales today, offensive coordinator. He had a few interesting things to say, specifically about the identity of the team's offense and the run game as a whole. He just doesn't think that, the blocking obviously hasn't been the best. We know that. The running hasn't been the best either. They're 2.7 carries, yards per carry in the league right now. And for a team that finished dead last in rushing, that's not the kind of production that you want to see, especially from an offensive system that talked about mirroring the pass and run. While they've been very balanced, and we talked about that on Wednesday's podcast, the results aren't there. As part of it, Canal says, is just because the mentality of the team isn't there yet. They haven't identified themselves as what they're going to be. Are they going to be that mentality of run blocking and impose their will on other players? So, that's something that, will come. He talked about the offensive scheme. The guys know it. There's not much to install at this point. They're still adding new things and tweaking things on a game plan basis. But for the most part, it's all about execution now. It's all about, getting the play action where it needs to be, where he doesn't feel like it is. It's about, catching the ball, not turning over. Those things will kill you. We know they will. And the Bucs were really good with it through the first 2 weeks, and then had an interception and a fumble last week. So those things will kill you, and it needs to get better. And if it's going to get better, it's got to start up front. They got to get better push from their linemen, specifically the interior. Bob Hainsey has been pushed around a lot by bigger defensive linemen. The Eagles had their way with them last week, while Cody Mock has shown flashes. And these guys have been pretty decent in pass protection for a team that kind of prides itself on being run blockers. They've struggled a little bit. So the good news is Tristan Wirfs looks like an animal at left tackle. Hasn't really dropped off. There's some improvement that needs to be made, but he's making a switch as an all-pro right tackle to the left side. He's going to get better. You look at his stats. He didn't allow a single pressure or obviously a sack against the Eagles' vaunted front seven last week. And Luke Gedeke, too. He has been a real surprise on the right side. Obviously did not work out at left guard last year. He's been out there and really moving people. Last week, he finished in the top 15 of pass protection grades. The week prior was a top 10. He's really surprised in pass protection. And one of the things that Dave Canales mentioned about specifically, Cody Mock and Luke Gedeke is that, with Cody, his flexibility, athleticism, and his recovery, that's one of the things that has impressed me most watching the tape, is even if he does get beat, he's got the athleticism and recovery to make it not look as bad as it should, and kind of get there and save what could have been a disastrous play. And then Luke Gedeke is just so strong. He's one of the strongest guys on this team. He can really moves. He's got a lot of power from a pass protection standpoint. They're doing their job when it comes to pass protecting. And Baker's only been sacked 3 times this season as a whole, and 2 of those came against the Eagles, who put up 70 sacks as a team last year. So they've been doing a good job, and they're going to have to carry that over because they've got a difficult challenge. And 2 guys who are no strangers to the Buccaneers backfield, and Cam Jordan, who's had over 20 career sacks against the Buccaneers, and obviously Curtis Granderson, who just got 2.5, 3 sacks on the season and just got a huge deal. And we'll talk about those guys and what they bring just here in a second. I'm going to get our guest in here in a minute, but each week, obviously, national ranking come out for power rankings. And one of the things that I was surprised to see is the Bucs didn't really move. maybe a few spots back, but this team is still in that, mid to upper mid half in a lot of people's minds. I think when you look at the Eagles, they are the defending NFC conference champions. And, it was an uphill battle for a Bucs team that's not necessarily as complete of a team as the Eagles are. And they still held their own for the most part. Obviously, there were things that I'm sure they would like back because they didn't get the win, but they did a well enough job. A lot of people didn't think they were going to win that. I think their consensus ranking right now is around 18, 17 somewhere. So they're right in the thick of it, especially right in the thick of it in this division in the NFC South, where all three teams lost last week in the Panthers, the Saints, and the Falcons. The Falcons got beat by the Lions, and then the Saints just got kind of embarrassed, letting the Packers just run up unanswered points to come from behind and win the game, including a 2-point conversion. But we'll talk about that, what happened last week with the Saints. We'll talk about what's going on with their offensive line, what's going on in their quarterback position. And to do that, we're going to go behind enemy lines here. We're going to bring in David Grubb. And we're going to talk about the Saints. He covers them for the Bleav in Saints Podcast Network. And David, how are we doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. It's always fun week. Whenever you get to this Saints Bucs week, whether you're on the Cam Jordan side and this isn't a rivalry, our rivalries with the Falcons, or you're on the Bucs side who absolutely hates the Saints, it's always fun. And the chirping started today with Tyrann Mathieu and Cameron Jordan, spouting off in the media. But it's always a fun week, especially it has a little bit extra to it this week with potentially David Carr being sidelined with that AC injury, and Jameis Winston, Tampa Bay's former number 1 overall pick, Heisman Trophy winner, maybe in line for the start. What's the latest on that? What are you hearing? I know David Carr's been trying to work through it, but is there any way he plays this week?
Derek was at practice today, but he didn't participate. Been getting mostly mental reps. And in that regard, going to play. I think this is a bad matchup for him. The Bucs are a team with 9 sacks on the season already, 3 sacks a game. This is not – the Saints' offensive line is one of the worst in the NFL, and his throwing shoulder is injured. It just doesn't make sense this early in the season to risk a long-term injury to him when essentially you still don't think anybody in this division is going to run away with it. I think this is,
right.
Most people would say this is a division that can be won with 9 or 10 wins, like it's been the last couple of years.
Right.
And these are the 2 teams who have won the last 6 division titles between them. So yeah, it is a rivalry. I mean, I think that, the Saints have dominated in the regular season, but getting into the playoffs is the thing. Getting to the Super Bowl is the thing. And the Saints haven't been back to the Super Bowl since they won the Super Bowl. So it's they've only been to one NFC championship game in that time. So I think that this is a huge game for Dennis Allen. It's a huge game for this franchise. And honestly, I don't think there's a noticeable drop-off at all if Derek Carr doesn't play and Jameis does.
Wow, those are some big words for the $150 man that they brought in. So what is it from Derek Carr that you've seen so far that leads you to that assessment that you don't think it would be a big drop off from Derek Carr, who was brought in to be the face of the franchise, this franchise savior kind of at the quarterback position when they've had Jameis on the roster the last 3 years?
What in Derek Carr's history makes us think he's any kind of savior? I mean, let's look at the numbers for real. Okay, between him and Dennis Allen, Derek Carr, in his career, the 9 years that he spent with the Raiders, they only ranked in the top 10 in points twice, never in the top 5, 7 and 10. And they did that in 2 of his last 3 years. Average, they were about 19th a year in points. So that's not a kind of quarterback to me. And you could say, we understand the Raiders had a terrible defense. I think they were like something they averaged 26 in the NFL in points allowed at that time. But if your offense is really bad, that doesn't help your defense either.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if your offense can take time off the clock and score points itself, that helps the defense too. Right. So, Derek Carr wasn't always helping his defense by putting up points. Just because he didn't throw a lot of interceptions, to me, does not make him a dynamic quarterback. Yeah, he made some Pro Bowls, but everybody makes the Pro Bowl now. Overall, and then you compare that to Dennis Allen, a guy in his career who has never won more than 7 games in any regular season, has never had an offense that has scored more than 20.1 points per game in a season. 20.1. He can't get you to blackjack. So to me, mixing this guy who drafted Derek Carr and watched Derek Carr not produce major numbers, and also in his career, both as head coach of the Raiders and as head coach of the Saints, his most notable win is against the Bucs. That shutout, the Saints scored 9 points.
Right.
Okay, so like the Saints have this franchise-long record now, and they could possibly, and I think they probably will this weekend, because I don't think either one of these teams is going to score a lot of points. But they're about to put their 12th consecutive game together of holding a team to 21 points or less.
Yeah.
In the 13 games that they've done that since Dennis Allen has been head coach, they're 7-6.
Yeah.
Like, if you hold a team under 20, you're supposed to win.
Right.
The vast majority of the time. The Saints are 7-6 in those 13 games. So I don't have a lot of confidence in this offensive line. It's been terrible. They can't run the football. They've been held below 77 yards in 2 out of 3 games. And they haven't shown the ability to get the ball to anybody other than Chris Olave.
That's where I wanted to go next, to this offensive line. Obviously, Ryan Ramczyk, one of the best right tackles in the league, but hasn't played it. And then you look at the injury report, 2 straight practices missed by Cesar Ruiz, starting center, who they paid quite a lot of money to this offseason to retain. What's been up with the offensive line? Is it injuries hampering them, or is it just they're not gelling correctly, or is it what Carr's doing behind the offensive line, and kind of is that part of the issue too?
Love it. They have had injuries. They have had inconsistency. They have drafted poorly. Like, you have to. This offensive line is made up of 4 first-rounders and 1 second-rounder. Eric McCoy was a very solid center his first year. Then they draft Cesar Ruiz, whose primary position is center, and Eric McCoy has not been the same since. He's not been the same player. As you said, Ryan Ramczyk, the first 4 years of his career, he was the best right tackle in the NFL. He didn't make the Pro Bowl any of those years, but I will say he was the best right tackle in the NFL during that period. He was the nastiest, most physical right tackle. That's why the Saints ran behind him. He hasn't been that in 2 years. And last week, Trevor Penning, who was basically a rookie, and Andrus Peat, who has been a huge disappointment in his career, were your 2 best rated offensive linemen. Right. So it tells you it's guys that you should be able to count on are not playing well. Guys who are drafted highly have not played well. And that's on coaching, that's on the players, that's on the play calling. So all of those things, it's just the perfect storm of bad offensive line play. They haven't been able to run the ball in 3 years. Alvin Kamara, the last 2 years, is averaging below 4 yards a carry.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to next. They've struggled to run the ball. The Bucs have struggled to run the ball too, but Saints have struggled to run the ball this season. Kamara's coming off a 3-game suspension. He's going to, obviously, how fresh do you think he is? What do you expect from him? Obviously, the numbers are still there from a number sense, but the eye test, you can tell he's not the same explosive guy he used to be. Injuries have definitely played a part in taking away some of that explosiveness and dynamicism that he used to have. But what do you expect from Alvin Kamara this week? Do you expect some of the same old stuff, or is it hold your breath on bated breath because you don't know what you're getting?
Man, the Saints have not done a good job of utilizing the running backs in the passing game, even when Alvin Kamara was with them the last 2 years. He's averaged only 50 catches a season over the last couple seasons, where he was getting 80 over his first 3. His running has not, like last year, he didn't have a carry over 30 yards. That's not Alvin Kamara. He scored 6 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. He used to be the best red zone back in the NFL. He was historically good in the red zone.
Right.
He doesn't even get there now. Doesn't get touches in there. They give those touches to Taysom Hill. So I don't know what to expect from Alvin Kamara. Of course, everybody is saying, well, he's in great shape and he's fresh. Sure, okay. But the last 2 years, you were in shape and you were fresh. when the season started, and you ended up putting up back-to-back the two worst seasons of his career.
Right.
I don't have any trust in Pete Carmichael. I don't have any trust in Dennis Allen. I don't have any trust in this line. And I think Alvin, unfortunately, at the age of 28, is his best years are behind him.
Well, you talk about issues in the red zone and everything like that, and how much he was. You got only 4 touchdowns so far in these first 3 games, 2 receiving, 2 on the ground, and those 2 on the ground were just 2-yard runs by the running back Tony Jones. What has been going on with their ability or inability to score points on the offensive side of the ball? Obviously, you had Rashid Shaheed, and we'll get into him and his big punt return and a defensive touchdown as well. But what's been going on with the ineffectiveness to get it in the red zone, punch it in, and put points on the board?
It's been another weird thing. The Saints brought back Jimmy Graham, and you think, okay, you brought back a 35-year-old who's been out of the league for a year. You bring him back because you're going to use him in the red zone. You don't put a third tight end at that age unless you're specifically going to use that guy when you get to the red zone. His first target and his first catch for a touchdown, but they were in week 3.
Right.
And the Saints had been in the red zone in weeks 1 and 2, and we never saw Jimmy Graham. So I don't understand what the play calling. I don't understand the teams, the players that they're using. Taysom Hill hasn't gotten carries in the red zone. They've thrown a lot of passes in the red zone with Derek Carr, and they have not worked. You have the 1 touchdown that he did get to Shaheed in week 1 was from 19 yards. So technically that's the red zone. But other than that, it's been – you haven't seen Jawan Johnson, who is a converted wide receiver who has great catch radius, and you haven't seen him in the red zone getting opportunities. He's only had, I think, 6 targets all season long. So I think the play calling has been weird. I think Derek Carr has locked in on receivers and not had good reads. He's thrown both of his interceptions, have come in the red zone. So I just don't. It's just everything that can go wrong offensively for the Saints this season, other than Chris Olave. Like, he's the only thing, and Shaheed's 1 punt return. You take that away, we're not even talking about the Packers game being close at all.
Yeah, and that's why the one silver lining I think on that offense is Chris Olave, who's helping me out on my fantasy team as well. But Chris Olave year 2, we saw what he did year 1. I mean, it just lights out, over 1,000 yards catching, targeted, I think, was it 127 times, just catching everything, used that speed, the yak ability to gain yards after the catch. What has been the most impressive thing about Chris Olave? And then even to a lesser extent, the way they've used Rashid Shaheed as, some silver linings on what you've seen from that offense.
When you talk about who the best receiver in the league is, I think it comes down to a matter of personal preference right now. Somebody will tell you it's Justin Jefferson. Somebody will say it's, Jamar Chase. Somebody will say whatever the list is. I'll just say that as far as Chris Olave is concerned, I don't know who runs routes better. You know what I mean? I don't know who has better hands. There are guys certainly as good because there's so many great receivers in the NFL. But if somebody called about any of those and said, we'll give you one of those for Chris Olave, the Saints would say no, because you're very happy with what you have. You have as good as you're going to get at that position, I think. You've seen the catches that he's been able to make on passes that he shouldn't have, most guys don't make. Right. His concentration is even better than it was last year. And the one steady thing, at least, is that none of the Saints receivers have had a drop this season. So if it has gotten near them, they've made the catch. It's just the passing has not been good. But Chris, he can beat you deep. He can beat you over the middle. He can run after the catch. Like you say, he runs like a running back after he gets the ball in space. And he's strong now, much stronger than he was as a rookie.
And Michael Thomas back. What does he look like so far? We know if Carlton Davis can't go, that's going to be a fun matchup. They've got these matchups, with Evans and Lattimore and Thomas and Carlton Davis. But what does Michael Thomas look like? Finally back after it feels like almost 3 years since he put up those numbers.
Yeah, it's basically been that 3 seasons since we've really seen Michael Thomas, and the Saints. They opened week 1 targeting him and getting some plays that actually got downfield. He had some 20-yard catches. He looked like he could. Separation is never his thing as far as speed, but he looked good. He was running well. But as the offense is stalled, he's only getting about 9 yards a catch, 3 catches a game. So, he's not producing. But again, it's just, as I said, it's been a failure for this offense on so many levels. He looks fine. Physically, he looks fine. But this offense is just wasting all of its talent. Shaheed, on the other hand, you've seen it. He can make the big play. He's had big catches. He's scored in 2 of the 3 games so far this season. He's not just a speed guy. He's going to develop better as a wide receiver, but he is not just a speed guy. He runs his routes. He has good hands, and that gives the Saints 3 legitimate receivers. And in any NFL team, that's what you want to have. They've got an abundance of talent at the skill positions. It's just that either it's hurt like Jamal Williams, who's on the sidelines right now. It's coming back from suspension like Alvin Kamara. Your third and fourth back, Kendra Miller. Everybody was high on Kendra Miller coming out of the draft and out of training camp, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy. So the Saints have not gotten luck there, but at the same time, even when the guys are on the field, they're not producing.
Yeah, and you look at the offense right now, it hasn't been lighting it up. But jumping over to the defensive side, because I think that's where you can start really honing in on some, because it doesn't seem like you're too high on this Saints offense being able to move the ball. But the defense has been one of you mentioned the statistic, holding teams to less than 21 points. What about this defense has you excited? A lot of reshuffling, lost a co-defensive coordinator to the Falcons. He stole a couple of the guys as well. Daniel Anamata being the big one. Brought in first-round pick Brian Brees and Nathaniel Dell. What have you seen out of this front seven and this defense with the shuffling they did in the offseason?
They've been effective at getting pressure on the quarterback in both of the first 3 games, in all 3 of the first 3 games. Though, the fourth quarter against the Packers was not pretty. This team has a good combination of athleticism and leadership at every level. The defensive line was a huge concern coming into the season because it was very inexperienced and unproven. Outside of Cam Jordan, and Carl Grandison was a guy that had a lot of potential, but he hadn't put it together for a long enough stretch. Well, he's put it together to start the season. He's looked fantastic to start the year, and that's why he got his big extension. Cam Jordan has looked solid. At this advanced age, it's you're not expecting the same, but Cam is a complete defensive end. He can rush the passer, play the pass, and play the run. So, that's always been his skill. But Breezy's had his moments. Other guys on the defensive line have played well at times. Demario Davis, over the last 3 or 4 years, has been as good a middle linebacker as there is. Yeah. And Pete Werner's a tackling machine. Undersized, but a tackling machine.
Bring him down.
So I like them there, but it hurts that Marcus May is not there right now. He's on suspension for a DUI that he suffered in the offseason, and so he's got 2 more games to go. But that means you've got to put Tyrann Mathieu in coverage more, and that's not his forte. He's a playmaker. He's a guy like a Bob Sanders or a Troy Polamalu where you just trust that they're going to be where they're supposed to be. But if you're giving him a consistent coverage assignment, he's not a big guy. You can take advantage of him there. If you have to bring him up and run support, then who do you have at the back end? The corners are good. Alontae Taylor, Marshawn Lattimore. Lattimore did not have a good game last week. But that seems to be the thing with that. That's the thing I think that keeps Marshawn from being an all-pro, is that he will look like an all-pro against the best receivers. And then if he looks across and sees somebody he doesn't respect, he kind of takes his foot off the gas at times. And I think he did that last week in Green Bay.
Yeah, you look at the Saints team, especially the defense. I feel like they play to their competition a lot. You look at the first 3 weeks, and they're you just said it with Lattimore. He'll get up, and I think this defense gets up for those bigger challenges and plays really tough. Those other ones kind of, maybe, I don't want to say they overlook them, but kind of cruise control through it, and that's where they can get exposed and beat. The matchup everyone's tuning in to see this weekend, if you're a Bucs fan, Saints fan, is clearly going to be Mike Evans, Marshawn Lattimore. The last time these guys saw each other earlier in the season was week 2 of last year. Both of them got ejected. Evans got suspended. What is it about this rivalry, do you think, that is just these guys clearly don't like each other?
I think physical receivers are always going to be agitators for corners, and Mike is a very physical receiver. And he's incredibly talented, and he's cocky, talks, and Marshawn talks. So when we put all those things together, and Marshawn thinks he's as good as anybody that there is because he has statistical, games where he can show you that he shut down some of the best receivers in this league. He did it to DeAndre Hopkins in week 1. But I think, and then you add the stakes for these games in their careers, how it went from no stakes when they both first arrived to being the most important matchup every time they played. It's the biggest game in the division every time they play. And because it was driven by Drew Brees and Tom Brady. And even when it was Jameis, he was still throwing 4,000, 4,500, 5,000 yards. It was driven by the passing games. And so it was focused on those two guys. And I think that they're on the backside, that's been the one consistent. Up front, it's Cam. But on the backside, it's been Marshawn and Mike.
Right. 2 more things, and then we'll get you out of here. And it's just kind of breaking down some of the predictions. So we'll start with the Bucs. The Bucs offense succeeds if they can do what against the Saints defense?
Don't turn it over and convert on 3rd down. Because you can, like the big plays have been there against the Saints the last couple of weeks. Teams have been able to get downfield against them, go over the top against them. And that's been a success for Tampa for a number of years against the Saints is the big play in the passing game. And I think as long as they don't turn it over, I think they have a really good chance of winning the game. I picked against the Saints last week against the Packers, but I think if the Bucs are going to score, this is not going to be a high scoring game, but it's going to be about sustaining drives and owning the field, being able to flip it when you need to.
Saints will be able to move the ball against the Bucs defense if they can
finally get something out of the running game. You look at what happened against Philly for the Bucs. And how Philly was able to get some big runs late. And if you're the Saints, you've got to try to figure out how to capitalize on, as you talked about it earlier before I came on, the injuries up front. Vita Vea has eaten the Saints alive against the run the last couple of years. And we know the Saints have not gotten a run. If you're going to protect Jameis, who's not a tremendously mobile quarterback, and then you're also talking about the last time Jameis started against the Bucs, he tore his ACL.
Right.
And ended his season the day before Halloween 2 years ago, and Jameis was having a really good start to that season. And so I think that he's going to be really amped up, and I'm worried about that. So I think the Saints have to get off to a good start. They got to be able to run the ball on 1st down so that they can have play action passes. Because if Tampa can tee off on Jameis and not respect the run, he can step up in the pocket and move, but he's not a runner. And if that means Taysom Hill has to be under center a lot, then that means you can't throw. So the Saints have to be able to run the ball first down.
Have to take away what in order to beat the Saints on defense? What are they? What should be their main focus if they're going to stop this Saints offense?
Don't let the Saints rush. As far as the Bucs stopping the Saints offense, just pressure, just constant. I don't even think you have to blitz. I mean, the teams have not had to blitz because guys have been able to get right off of. I mean, Ramczyk in particular has been just blown up in one-on-one. So if the Bucs can get pressure, it's over. The Saints can't do anything. I mean, I think they're one of the worst teams in the league, and they're the bottom half in completion percentage and touchdowns, everything. So pressure. They've given 12 sacks already.
Quite a few sacks. David, I want to thank you so much for coming on here and breaking down this Saints. Doesn't seem like you're too high on this team through the first 3 weeks. I'm going to ask you for a score prediction. What do you got going on this week? Do you think the Saints come up ahead with that 3-1 in the division lead, or do you think it's going to be a long look in the mirror for them after this week?
I am going to make this one 19-17 Bucs.
Ooh, okay. Low scoring. I agree. I think this is going to be a low scoring game. I think the defenses are both a little bit better than the offenses right now, but I think with Jameis there, with the struggles the Saints have had, especially, protecting, I'd give the slight edge to the Bucs. I'll get my score prediction out tomorrow. But David, I want to thank you for coming on. Promote yourself. Where can people find you? Where can they see all your work, read your work, hear your work?
Check out the Bleav in Saints podcast on the Bleav Network, and you can check my company out, Hard in the Paint Sports, on YouTube and at hitpsports.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll have to get to talk. We got another game coming on later in the season, so we'll have to get you back on and talk then.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. There you guys have it. David Grubb from Bleav in the Saints podcast. Great insight. He's not too high on this Saints team. And I think that's one of these, you look at the situation here. Going into this season, I had this as a loss. I did my season predictions, and this was a loss. Bucs going into the bye week, 2-2. Spoiler, losing 3 in a row coming out of the bye week. But with the situation at hand, and this is why early season predictions are crazy, and you can never really go by them. With Jameis stepping in, the offensive line looking the way it's been, injuries, suspensions hitting the Saints team right now, I think this is a very winnable game for the Buccaneers. I think it's going to be low scoring. I don't think this goes over 45 points, so take the under. And I think the Bucs do come out victorious. I'll have my official score prediction over at Bucs Game Days by Sports Illustrated. Read all my content over there. But it's going to be a fun game. Everyone gets up for this matchup. If Carlton Davis can play, big thing to monitor on tomorrow's injury report. Like I said, he'll probably be game time decision. I would be surprised if he does go. If he does, he's going to gut it out. I don't know if that's a smart decision dealing with that turf toe. Jamel Dean, I don't think is going to play. Don't count on him. So Bucs will be relying on at least one young cornerback, when Zion McCollum probably, or D. Delaney starting over there. But it's going to be a really fun game. The Bucs have their bye week next week. We've got a lot of guests lined up, guys, next week. We got maybe, some coaches coming in, so stay tuned. We've got some players coming in, so stay tuned. Maybe attack the trenches a little bit. So definitely make sure you guys are liking and subscribing at Sick Podcast Pirate Parlay on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at SickPodBucks. Make sure you turn those notifications on, because I'm going to have, next week is the bye week, so I will have 3 Buccaneers guests on this show. I'll have 2 players and a coach. So make sure you guys are staying tuned. We'll break down before the bye what's going on during the bye. Get into some fun things too, a little bit, make it off what these guys are into off the field and everything like that. But I want to thank all you guys for tuning in. We went a little bit long today, but we had great content from a guest, so I want to make sure that we got everything we could out of that. Again, follow us at the Sick Podcast Pirate Parlay on Twitter at SickPodBucks. You guys can follow me on Twitter at JC Allen NFL. All of my work over at Bucs Game Day, powered by Sports Illustrated. Check us out on Twitter there for all the latest Bucs news and analysis. And always keep it right here at the Pirate Parlay Podcast, presented to you by the Saints Podcast Network. We're out.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Pirate Parlay on YouTube, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.